Mozart was born into a musical family. His father Leopold was the author of a famous manual on violin playing and deputy director of music to the Archbishop of Salzburg.
What do you think the outcome will be, Herr Schenk?
I can assure you, Herr Mozart, the Archbishop is delighted with your composition. I heard him say so. And that his violinists will have to study them closely by Ascension Day.
Leopold's family was small but close. Maria Anna, his wife, for whom he'd been disinherited for marrying beneath his station. His daughter, Nan Earl, herself an accomplished keyboard player. And little Wolfgang, 4 years younger and the apple of Leopold's eye.
My little brother had a passion for knowledge. His tasks occupied him completely. For example, when he was doing sums, the table, chairs, walls, even the floor were covered in chalk figures. One day my father came home from work and found Wolfgang busy scribbling away. He must have been about 4 at the time. Papa asked him what he was writing. "A keyboard concerto," replied Wolfgang, "and I've nearly finished the first part." Papa was, needless to say, very dubious as to this assertion, but he had a look at the manuscript.
That evening when I asked him to play me something, I knew immediately that my life was now in servitude to something as rare, sounds poetic, I grant, as rare as when the moon blots out the sun. Let's hear the subject. God had given him to me in his great mercy. The answer. It was my duty from the moment he began to play to ensure that my son's sacred music brought joy to the world.
From the beginning, his father was terrified by the boy's fragility. The boy was particularly disturbed by harsh, discordant, excessively loud sounds. So to make sure that this wonder, this miracle of nature, was not deterred by such sensitivity, Leopold asked me to sneak up on him unawares with my trumpet. When I blasted him from behind, Wolfgang's face drained of blood, and to his father's shock, the boy quite fainted.
Aware of his son's sensitive condition, Leopold's excitement remained undiminished. As a composer himself, he already recognised that the boy was writing something of real value. If Leopold could secure release from his duties in Salzburg, he would have the chance to transform his family's fortunes.
Does not do to keep his grace waiting.
Finishing his scores. He's waiting. I've been working through the night and the night before.
Leopold was desperate to share his son's talents with the wider world, but his duties to the Archbishop remained an obstacle.
Mozart. Ah, my scores. Wonderful. I understand you wish a leave of absence from your duties here in Salzburg.
Your Grace, my son Wolfgang has a gift, sacred in its singularity. It will be your discerning taste and perception that will be admired far beyond these city walls. Should myself and my family be given your blessing?
It is not my name, but that of Salzburg that should, most probably will benefit from your efforts. Godspeed.
Your Grace is too generous. Too generous.
It must have seemed like the most terrifying enterprise for Leopold on that day, the 9th of June 1763. His whole family, these 2 gifted children, 7-year-old Wolfgang and his musically talented sister Nan Earl, leaving Salzburg and striding out into the unknown.
The adventure is beginning!
It was, I think, the make or break for Leopold, testimony perhaps to his great sense of self-belief.
Take care of those instruments. Some of them are very fragile. The only thing
He had to provide for everything.
Look after this for Wolfgang. He'll be very upset if...
Servants, horses, carriages. He engaged the services of a Mr. Winter to act as their hairdresser and valet. They needed clothes to impress, and perhaps most expensive of all, a carriage and 4 horses. He was risking everything on the talent of his own small son.
Wonderful feeling that morning. Escaping Salzburg had to be the best thing for my son. Only by his inhaling, how can I put it, the scent of a better class, feeling the adoration of 1,000 upon 1,000, could his musical education take flight. It wasn't luxury, but then how cosseted were the ancient Greeks aboard their trireme, with our loyal servant, Mr. Sebastian Winter, at the helm to guide our voyage. This truly was our Odyssey.
Driving as I am across Central Europe, I can only marvel at the enormous distances that the Mozart family had to traverse. But that being said, Leopold had picked the perfect time for this great trip. The 7-Year War had just come to an end. It had been a particularly bloody conflict where all anyone could do was watch their back and look after their own. But now, with peace across much of Europe, the aristocracy in particular were able to enjoy themselves again and to throw money at entertainment.
He's all of 7. How can a little mite of 7 impress us? Come and sit on my lap, you little monkey. Come along. I shall stroke your hair. He's so tiny, just like a doll.
Play for the ladies, Wolfgang.
Oh, you poor little thing. So delicate. But can you see the baby calluses?
I have just the thing. Here, Poppet. Try lanolin. It works a little miracle on my gardener.
What a peculiar little boy. He's from some frightful little town in Austria. I understand he has the ability to play blindfolded.
Oh, how remarkable. Well, if he wants his supper, he shall have to sing for it.
When the tiny Wolfgang was asked to play, what most astonished his aristocratic audience were his powers of improvisation. He'd be set a challenge, usually in the form of a bass line, something like that, and then he'd have to immediately come up with a complete piece of music based on that. So, 1 minute, maybe he'd do... Five minutes later, he'd come up with something completely different. And apparently, the seasoned composers of the day, the great musical minds, would come in one by one and challenge him to an improvisation contest. And several hours later, they'd stagger out, exhausted and spent. Mozart would bounce off the stool and say, "Any more?" As Wolfgang travelled through Germany into France, the invitations to play flooded in, and Leopold reaped the rewards. Snuff boxes, silver pens, gold pocket watches. The family was swiftly elevated from humble tradesmen to special guests at the royal courts of Europe. Wolfgang's imagination was stimulated by meeting the great musical minds of the age. All this attention had quite an impact on his image of himself.
I worried about Wolfgang. He always seemed to be lost in a world of his own, quite detached from reality. Of course, when he shared his imaginings with me, I was happy. He invented a land which he called the Kingdom of Back. It had everything for good and happy children, and Wolfgang was king of it all. He asked the coachman to draw a map, and he would dictate the names of cities, market towns, and villages. In this world, Wolfgang would sit on embroidered cushions and dispense treats and favours to the children of his land. Sometimes I think he spent more time there than in the everyday world.
This little boy became a superstar because of his musical powers, which many believed were supernatural. Some said Wolfgang was the creative spirit of God, embodied in the most innocent of creatures. Others gave him more political powers, that here was a symbol of a new egalitarian age.
Extraordinary mental, spiritual prowess enshrined in the body of an infant. My son was unquestionable proof of new, enlightened beliefs that talent could be given to all, not confined to a special class.
But the everyday world of travelling musicians was dangerous and grueling. In the warmth of my car, I can't begin to experience the cold and wet that forced the Mozarts to wrap their children's feet in felt and bury them beneath the straw that lay on the carriage floor. And deprived of fresh food, the family became malnourished and sick. As months turned into years, Wolfgang had to learn the hardships of life. Winter stiffened bones suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, and fever left him deathly sick for 2 months. But illness wasn't the only problem. The coach itself began to buckle under the strain.
Bastard! What do you see from up there?
How did Leopold justify a project that resembled not so much a heroic Greek odyssey, but a travelling circus with its prize freak for hire?
I wasn't only a father and a teacher, but a missionary. What was my advancement at court compared to my divine task? Showing those who were beginning to doubt that miracles did exist.
In early 1764, the Mozarts even crossed the perilous Channel to perform to an expectant English public.
Ladies and gentlemen, silence, please. The greatest prodigy that Europe, or even human nature, can boast of is, without contradiction, the little German boy, Wolfgang Mozart. A boy, 8 years old, who has, and indeed, very justly, won the admiration of not only the greatest men, but also the greatest musicians in Europe.
Leopold rented a theatre in Soho, selling tickets at 10 shillings and sixpence, about £40 today, to those eager to hear the boy who had charmed mad King George himself. In the duets, Wolfgang would play the lower role, whilst Nannerl was given the more seemly higher octaves. Little Wolfgang can't help showing off his compositional skills with all these trills and playful little scales. But in its uplifting warmth and lightness in feel, you can hear his rapid strides from his early works and sense the greater things to come.
Ladies and gentlemen, for your delight and wonder. The boy will now play a concerto without sight of his own hands.
But there were also those deeply suspicious of Wolfgang's true abilities. The English authorities appointed a jury to assess whether Leopold was being truly accurate with his claims that such extraordinary compositions came from the head of an 8-year-old boy.
I was charged with submitting tests to the Royal Society. I have to say I had doubts as to whether the father was being truly accurate with the boy's age, although he certainly had a most childlike appearance and disposition. My report to the Royal Society stated most emphatically that his execution was amazing. The scale clearly preponderated on the side of Mozart, and that he was as worthy as our own Handel of receiving the title prodigy.
During this 3.5-year grand tour the Mozarts made, Wolfgang learnt an enormous amount. He found how to charm and entertain princes and kings, Louis XV, George III, and also how to transfix a crowd. And one of the things I love about Mozart is that even in these formative years, his music was for everyone. Eventually, he returned to Salzburg a much more complicated child, and Leopold wrote about this with a mixture of trepidation and defiance, as well he might. Childhood has the power to entrance. I sometimes think that Leopold was a dreamer of almost impossible dreams, in that he hoped, by sheer belief alone, that he could render childhood eternal.
Difficult time. Things were not going as I'd planned. All of Europe marveled at my son. But in Salzburg, his great merits went unrecognized. He should, at the very least, been offered a post as court composer, but I would sooner trust a horse trader, a soothsayer, a mountebank, and one of those seething, envious, backbiting nobles of the court.
Most beloved and esteemed Signor, I beg you to tell me what you think of my humble music. We live in a world where the arts should be encouraged, so that we may enlighten one another. But in the country where I live, music must struggle even to exist.
This grand piano that I'm playing on here is really quite a lot like the fortepiano upon which Mozart composed his piano concerto in B-flat when he was 20. The fortepiano was very much his instrument. There had been an enormous revolution in keyboards and keyboard design leading up to this point. There'd been the clavichord, a small domestic instrument where the string is struck but the sound is tiny. Then the harpsichord, the string is plucked, but very little potential there for expressive colour. And then there was the forte piano, which by the 1770s was undergoing a revolution of its own in terms of the way its action was designed. It meant that now you could play the same note repeatedly in a way that you hadn't been able to before. Also, the sound, the depth of expression and possibility was growing all the time with the instrument, and Mozart seized on this. But here, in this B-flat major concerto, there is actually a sense of being hemmed in, of constriction in this music, which must have been very much how Mozart felt being stuck in Salzburg.
If I'm truthful, my son's temperament contributed towards his frustrations in trying to obtain a permanent position. My son was brilliant, but he could not temper himself. In 1771, a new man came to power in the bishopric, Hieronymus Colloredo, who was less sympathetic to the aspirations of my family.
I've always imagined Archbishop Colloredo as rather a narrow, conservative man, jealously guarding his own fiefdom. But in fact, he was a great supporter of the Enlightenment, and he had portraits of two of its heroes, Rousseau and Voltaire, on his study walls, which from time to time he had to cover up in order to avoid offending some of the more conservative burghers of Salzburg. The picture the Mozart family paint of him is obstructive and bullish, unwilling to embrace their grand design. You have to have some sympathy with him, though. They'd returned to Salzburg, having in their eyes conquered the world. He was paying them a perfectly honest salary. Why should he bend his will to their every desire?
Oh, Father, I bet you a kreutzer that you can't hit our musical friends from Italy.
I'm perplexed at their newfound ascendancy in the diocese. Their playing is sodden with sentimentality.
Signor Baldoni has been silenced.
I'm serious. The theatres are closed, our concerts curtailed, the mass is shortened. Our prospects do not look good.
The final 25 years of the 18th century were a time of political change across Europe. The old aristocracy were in decline, and the middle class were growing more prosperous, more numerous, and developing their own political ideas. And Mozart's decision to base himself in Vienna put him right at the centre of this. His new hope was the patronage of Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II of Austria, an absolute monarch with a passion for music and an agenda for social reform.
It is the will of His Majesty, Joseph II, Emperor of Austria, that the practice of torture to extract confession be abolished.
Further, continue.
And that the death penalty be replaced by the sentence of lifelong hard labour.
Deterrence being the key.
And further, that the royal hunting grounds be opened to the Viennese public as a park for their recreation and pleasure.
A place of leisure for all men, from one who esteems them.
And so, a royal hunting park became a people's paradise. Joseph, ever aware of the danger of revolution, was keen to encourage the German middle class whilst restricting the privileges of his Italianate nobility. And in the process, theatre became something of a political football. In an age before TV and cinema, theatre was more than just entertainment. It was a forum for up-to-date thinking, new ideas, moral comment. So, whilst the aristocracy were flocking to the gorgeous, rarefied and witty world of Italianate opera, a new German audience were eagerly awaiting their own operas, their own popular culture.
Your Grace, most worthy Prince of the Holy Roman Empire, my father begs you to allow us to travel for a few months in order that we can make some money. You refused to grant such leave. Our situation is pressing, and you object, my gracious prince and lord. My father has dedicated himself to my education, and I owe it to him to lighten his burden.
So the court musician wishes to dictate when he plays and when he doesn't. And do they really think that I believe that this is written by the son and not the father? So they wish to seek their fortunes elsewhere. And so they shall. Tell Mozart the younger that he may travel, but that I'll not have the treasury drained by the father's absence. Frau Mozart can nurse the boy.
Mozart's liberty was a blow to Leopold. At 21, he'd flown the nest. Frau Mozart was ordered to spy on his every move.
Did I tell him to take the straight road from Salzburg to Mannheim?
Yes, you did, Father.
Does he know to approach Munich from the east?
Yes, he does.
Because the bridge has collapsed. Perhaps it is my fault, his lack of worldliness. I have done everything for him, trying to give him the freedom to concentrate. Exchanged money, found horses, lodgings, practically wiped the crumbs from the corner of his mouth. How can he be expected to obtain a position without my help? If he fails, everything is lost.
It seems as if the more distance Mozart put between himself and his father, the more he dallied and avoided employment. Mozart had tasted freedom, and he had a novel supply of excuses for why hard cash wasn't being sent back to Salzburg.
No money, but another fine gold watch. What one needs on a journey is money, and now I have 5 of the things. I'm seriously thinking of having an additional watch pocket on each leg of my trousers, so that when I visit some great lord, I shall wear all my watches, and then it will not occur to him to present me with another one.
Mozart had more pleasurable distractions than begging a position. A year into his journey, he experienced a new sensation: sex. Before long, he was bedding his cousin Maria Tekla and writing her letters that were explicitly coarse. And then, on reaching Mannheim, Mozart met a 16-year-old singer and fell in love.
That's it. Mademoiselle Aloysia Weber sang 3 arias to me. Excellent. As far as the singing is concerned, I would wager my life that she will bring me renown. She has greatly profited from my instruction. We will go to Holland and then to Switzerland. You, Father, must do everything in your power to get us to Italy, where I can write opera and she will sing.
Examine yourself, my dear Wolfgang. Millions have not received the tremendous favor which God has bestowed on you. You are confronted with far more dangers than those millions who have no talent. What a responsibility, and what a shame if such a genius were to founder.
Beautiful.
Leopold now dedicated himself to tearing his son from Aloysia. As he saw it, his whole life's work depended upon it. Classic parent behaviour here, I think. Father sensing control of his son slipping through his fingers, so he goes off the deep end. And there's an amazing letter he wrote on the 11th of February 1778, which is a torrent of anguish, self-pity and threats. He orders Mozart to Paris, claiming that he'll be otherwise utterly forgotten by the world.
Yes, I told him he risked being captured by some woman and dying, bedded on straw in an attic full of starving children. What else could I do? If you'd have been a father, you'd have done the same.
So finally, worn down by his father's protests and chronically short of money, Mozart left the very next day for Paris, thereby breaking off his relationship with Aloysia. Now, you might think it was easy enough to dismiss that as some kind of youthful fling, but I think that'd be very wrong. Mozart experienced, as far as we know, for the only time in his life, something we've all probably experienced, real heartache. Arriving in Paris then, desolate and raw, confronted by some of the worst rain the city had seen all year, Mozart was entering into a new, dark period, which would ultimately change the nature of his music forever.
My dearest father, I have some very distressing news for you. My dear mother is very ill. She has been bled, but complains of shivering and feverishness. The doctors give me hope, and we must remain calm.
It was typical Fulfil. Even with my mother lying dead before him, he still wrote to us of his hopes that she would recover. He was trying to protect us, I suppose. He asked close friends to be on hand for father when the sad news reached Salzburg. Despite everything that happened, I'll always remember how he tried to protect father when Mama died.
When I found out what happened, I blamed him for taking my wife from me. Maria Anna had borne me 7 children, 2 of which survived. By the grace of God, the love she had for 7, she gave to 2. Lost in his own world. He did not care for her. He took her from me.
There can be no greater expression of the suffering that Mozart was experiencing than in his A minor sonata, which he wrote after his mother's death. This marks a huge sea change in his compositional style. Things could never somehow be quite the same again. Firstly, the choice of key, A minor. Musicians up to this point had always viewed minor keys as being somehow imperfect and unstable. And so it's very significant that Mozart chooses a minor key, and particularly A minor, which has a dark and very stark quality to it. Also, there's an enormous sense of contrast through the piece, so that you get pianissimo butting up against fortissimo, very soft against very loud, in a way which simply had never been seen before in a keyboard sonata. And then in the third movement, you get these enormous leaps that the pianist has to accomplish. It's like Mozart is struggling to keep things off his mind. And
And the way he ends the movement is so abrupt and unsatisfactory, charging forward, sort of beyond the buffers. But it's in the slow movement, the middle movement, that I think we really get the key to this piece. There's something outwardly simple about it. Almost, well, certainly from my point of view, as if it's daddy music. It's about his father. It's about the sense of separation from his father, the umbilical cord being ripped. And you get these extraordinary juxtapositions of colour which create a deep sense of torment. In early 1779, Mozart returned to Salzburg and the watchful eye of his family. After such freedom, how caged he must have felt, once more a lowly court musician. "10 years earlier, and Mozart's at the crossroads. At 25, he's too old to be a prodigy, but he's yet to prove himself as a mature composer. So, here he is in provincial Salzburg, where there's neither a good orchestra nor an opera house. He's still living with his father and sister, and despite having served his apprenticeship with over a dozen stage works, he's still desperate for things to happen.
This desire to write opera is so strong. I hear an opera being discussed and I'm consumed with envy for its composer. It should be me in that theatre with my orchestra tuning their instruments, my singers putting on their costumes. Oh, sister, I've become quite beside myself. I can hear my music.
In Salzburg, there wasn't a hope of such a commission. The Archbishop had closed down our theatre company, which was a tragedy for all the people of Salzburg, whose rage for the theatre was immense. Our town looked to the coming of a company of strollers with as much eagerness as the inhabitants of Siberia looked to the return of spring. Blessed was the season that brought us the company of Emmanuel Schikaneder.
Hello, Emmanuel Schikaneder. I believe I'm expected. Oh, dear boy. Wolfgang, how nice to see you.
Salzburg was always a good town to play, and when I bumped into young Mozart, we hit it off immediately. Well, like me, he was a seasoned travelling performer. We soon became firm friends with the whole Mozart family. We took coffee together, gave them free tickets. I demonstrated my various roles, my dandy, my tyrant, my Hamlet, my fool.
Sir, the actor and impresario Emmanuel Schikaneder, who arrived in Salzburg town today.
This is an honor, sir.
Herr Schikaneder.
Emmanuel, this is my dear sister Nannerl.
Oh, my dear. What a pleasure it is to meet you.
Will you take some wine, Herr Schikaneder?
Oh, well, I never refuse an offer of wine. Thank you very much indeed.
He was absolutely a man of the theatre.
Delightful.
It was in his blood. We often spoke of the need for a true German language theatre. I remember him saying to me, I don't believe Italian opera can last forever, and besides, I'm German. I prefer German opera, even if it is more difficult to get a commission.
Herr Schikaneder, will you honour us with a song?
Oh, I hardly think this is the... Well, as it happens, I do have a little something which your brother may be familiar with. If I could...
In our repertoire, we already had a musical play that the prodigious Mozart had written at the tender age of 12. Bastian und Bastienne.
My beloved, so enchanting, soon I'll see your lovely face. Your sweet charms will end my yearning. Wealth could never take your place, could never take your place.
Oh, Chickinator, what a fine fellow you are.
Dear boy, will you write us an aria for our new play?
Give me your text, and I will write you something tasty.
Wonderful! Damn it, but on that occasion things were cut short. Wolfgang was suddenly away to Munich with an important opera commission in his pocket. Oh, I was truly sorry to see him go.
I shan't forget the sight of Chickinator running like a goose through the streets of Salzburg, waving goodbye to my son's carriage. And the aria... Every time Wolfgang wrote, he made a different excuse. He missed the mail coach, and surely it would be on the next run. I had to tell such lies, and I am not a good liar.
Chickinator and Mozart begin a friendship that won't mature for another decade when they'll write the magic flute together. But here and now, Mozart desperately needs to find an official, paid position. He's on his way to Munich because the Elector of Bavaria has commissioned him to write an Italian opera in the serious style. Idomeneo will tell the story of a hero's return from the Trojan Wars, a typical mythological subject for the formal and stylized opera seria, or serious opera. Where another composer might be tempted to rewrite or break the rigid rules, Mozart will inhabit the form from the inside and expand its possibilities.
And where was my son more likely to succeed than in the theatre? He had the benefit of my advice. Don't neglect the popular style. Write for the unmusical public as well as the musical ones.
The author of the text was Abbe Varesco, chaplain to Leopold's employer, the Archbishop, back in Salzburg. Leopold readily agreed to be the middleman between the poet and his son. He couldn't know it, but this would be his last detailed involvement in one of Mozart's projects.
I lived every moment of rehearsing and writing that work. I became indispensable. We corresponded every day. Varesco soon tired of changing the verses, but Wolfgang was determined that all the singing should have the natural flow of conversation. He'd say, well, this is a good verse, that one could be more dramatic, this one could be shorter, this one, will get rid of it altogether.
His childhood years on the road had exposed Mozart to the best art and entertainment that Europe had to offer. Now in Idomeneo, he had the chance to demonstrate his dramatic instincts.
Damn this cold! What I need most of all right now are cheerful spirits, a clear head, and the inclination to work. Dear Papa, the foot baths that you recommended have brought me little relief. And the singers make my blood boil.
Oh, we'd known the principles for some time. Dorothea Wendling charmingly played a Trojan princess, and her sister-in-law Elizabeth took the part of the other princess, Elettra. He did not, however, like Del Prato, a castrato who sang the part of the young prince, thinking him rotten to the core, a wretched singer, and a worse actor. But it was the king, Idomeneo, he found most difficult. He had known the singer Anton Raff for many years.
Raff is the best and most faithful person in the world, and one must show him respect because of his grey hair. But it frustrates me that he's so set in his old routines, despite his enthusiasm for one of the arias I have written for his voice.
I wake up in the morning and I'm singing it, and I go to my bed at night and I am still singing your song.
Well, you're most welcome, Herr Raff.
It makes him easy to compose for, if you are happy to be conventional and let him rattle on for hours. But I have no desire to bore the audience.
The old man is too fond of singing his chopped noodle.
We need to feel your pain, your desperation. In this aria, you're railing against fate. And for that to happen, it must come from within. If it comes from within, then the audience will believe it. And for your actions should be a natural extension of the music. Are you with me?
Yes, of course.
Good. From the beginning again. His voice is still a lovely thing to hear. But he pays no attention to expression and now finds it increasingly difficult to reach some of the notes.
Raff's Fuor del Mar is a typical bravura aria, traditionally designed to show off a singer's virtuosity, hence these elaborately decorated vocal lines. Mozart's determination was to put all his music right at the centre of the action, driving the plot inexorably forward.
Because of the old man's limitations, he chipped away at the text, so that the singer's limitations became both disguised and made glorious.
Dearest friend, if I could change one note of this quartet, believe me, I would do so. Sing it through with the others and you'll see that I'm right.
Mozart wanted to hold his audience's attention every step of the way, so any changes he made to Varesco's libretto avoided an unnecessary diversion or some useless piece of action. The notes and the music must propel the drama at all times. Now, no one had ever behaved before in this fashion in the rather sedate world of opera seria. He wanted scenes to dissolve into each other. So, take the end of Fuor del Mar, for instance. You get... Now that ought to be the end, but it isn't. Chi mai? There's Electra, we're into the next scene. Mozart even said, in his own words, that at the end of the act there should be the greatest possible noise for the shortest possible time, so the audience have no time to cool down before they have to applaud. And his first audience, who invited himself to the last rehearsal, was none other than his patron, the Elector of Bavaria.
The last rehearsal was magnificent, and all the music is as it should be, threatening a storm. You can hear the sea, and everybody is now pleased. When we had finished, the Elector shouted, "Bravo!
This opera is charming. No music has ever had such an effect on me. It will bring you great honour. Then he said, "Who would think such great thoughts came from so small a head?"
Who indeed would think that such great thoughts came from so small a head? A compliment of sorts, but still no court position. He left us all to go to Vienna.
It was here in Vienna, the busy and vivid city which was the political, cultural and economic capital of the Austrian Empire, that Mozart settled for what was to prove to be the last decade of his life. With its vast, knowledgeable audience and 5 thriving theatres, the city will nurture his sense of drama and so enable him to transform the operatic conventions of his day.
Soon after Mozart had set up residence in Vienna, our unforgettable Emperor Joseph II formed a plan so worthy of the Austrian Emperor of alienating taste from Italian operas by supporting the German language Singspiel. Thus would he encourage a more patriotic outlook. Accordingly, he assembled Vienna's best singers and commissioned a German opera from that upcoming talent, Mozart.
And Mozart was just the man for the job.
My fervent desire is to help forward the German language theatre. I wish to do honour to the whole German-speaking people. I thank God that I'm a good, God-fearing German.
The abduction from the seraglio was a new form of popular musical, mixing dialogue with songs. The light-hearted and exciting story of a noble hero's bungled attempt to rescue his beautiful lover from the clutches of the Turkish Pasha and his larger-than-life overseer, Osmin.
Oh, wie will ich triumphieren, wenn sie euch zum Brief führen. Die Hälse schnüren zu, schnüren zu. Und die Hälse schnüren zu, schnüren zu. Schleicht nur säuberlich und leise ihre verdammten Ahrensmäuse. Unser Ohr entdeckt euch schon, und ehe ihr uns könnt entspringen, seht ihr euch in unseren Schlingen und erhaschet euren Lohn. Und erhaschet euren Lohn. Schleicht nur säuberlich und leise ihre verdammten Ahrensmäuse. Unser Ohr entdeckt euch schon, entdeckt euch schon, entdeckt euch schon. Ha, wie will ich triumphieren, wenn sie euch zum Brief führen. Die Hälse schnüren zu, schnüren zu, schnüren zu, schnüren, schnüren, schnüren zu, schnüren, 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 schnüren zu. Und die Hälse schnüren zu, und die Hälse schnüren zu, schnüren zu, schnüren zu, schnüren, schnüren, schnüren zu, schnüren, 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 schnüren zu. Und die Hälse schnüren zu, und die Hälse schnüren zu.
This Singspiel created a widespread sensation. I was witness of the enthusiasm which it caused among cognoscenti and amateurs alike when it was performed. It was as if all we'd previously heard and known had not really been music at all. And the cunning Italians soon saw that such a keen German mind posed a threat to their foreign plottings. It exposed their childish tinklings. Envy now awoke, with all the sharpness of Italian poison.
With our mutual friend's Turkish piece, he seems to think he has the Emperor in his pocket.
But have you heard what His Excellency said?
No. Do tell.
Too beautiful for our ears, dear Mozart, but an enormous number of notes.
Our composer's reply: just as many notes, Your Majesty, as are necessary. How much do noble dignity and frankness go with great genius.
And whilst wooing the emperor with his clever political choice, he was also wooing his future wife, Constanza, who shares her name with the heroine of the opera.
Ach, Constanze, ach, mein Leben.
influence of his romantic mood on the composition of this opera is there for all to hear. Everybody knows how it's brimming with sweet thoughts and languishing love.
As you know, Wolfgang and I were now employed by Archbishop Prince Colloredo of Salzburg. Despise the man. Be that as it may, things came to a head in 1781 when the Arch-Ofer, which is what we called him, decided to visit Vienna, bringing an entourage with him, including Wolfgang. It's a shame that I had to stay in Salzburg. Perhaps I could have restrained him, but a man of 25 years ought to know when to keep his temper.
I'll not brook such impertinences. Mozart must be quartered here so we can keep an eye on him. There's the conceit and arrogance of his father. Mannerisms unwelcome in those who peddle themselves around Europe like travelling beggars. The elder is of little use in my employment. Small wonder that none will take on the son. You will ensure that he sits where station requires, beneath the valet with the cooks. We should put an end to such fantasies of station.
We are here in Vienna, and Colloredo will not allow better terms. The inhuman villain. Oh, that's what he is. A villain. I am seething with rage, for twice already he has said the greatest sotties and impertinences to my face. He called me a rascal and a dissolute fellow, a cretin. Oh, I do not want to write to you all the things he said. Finally, as my blood began to boil, I said, "So your Highness is not satisfied with my service?" "What? Are you threatening me? You cretin. There is the door. I don't want to have anything to do with such miserable scum anymore." At last, I said, "And I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore either."
These letters from Wolfgang are completely wild. You cannot accuse the Archbishop with all sorts of insults and abandon our private code. It's his intention. He knows the Archbishop's spies open all the letters. Even now, they're rubbing their hands, gloating at his downfall. He has thrown away his only paid employment and willfully endangered my position.
Mozart came with his letter of resignation. I refused to accept it. It was his duty to get his father's consent before such an action. He then rounded on me and my steward, the good Count Arco, shouting that he knew his duty to his father better than we did, and that he would be very sorry if he had to learn it from us first. So Arco got him by the neck and kicked him well and truly up his backside out of my office.
You say that I have never shown you any affection and therefore ought now to show it for the first time. You add that I will never sacrifice any of my pleasures for your sake. To please you, I would sacrifice my happiness, my health and my life, but my honour, that I prize above everything.
We had constant rumours about Wolfeld's behaviour in Vienna. Drinking, womanizing, creating all kinds of scandal. My father was quite tortured by it. Me, I just thought, yet again, little brother inventing the rules for himself. If only I had gone to Vienna, I would have calmed him down, helped him to live a more ordered life. I wanted to be with him. But Father still needed me in Salzburg, and he never requested to visit. He was too proud for that. But I knew what was going on in his heart.
On the question of Colorado, it was unthinking, disrespectful to me. That's all I have to say.
This was a decisive moment for Mozart. Free from Colorado, he was free from his father. At last, he had the chance to unleash his almost obscene powers of creativity in the most exciting city on earth. Vienna in 1781 was a bit like Berlin in the 1920s. It was the place where musicians and artists of every hue were flocking. Also, there was a new emperor, Joseph II, who called for freedom of speech, an end to censorship, and was busy building a whole new social landscape where anyone, regardless of background or breeding, could become someone. Mozart now threw off the trappings of his provincial past. He developed a taste for the latest fashions, smoking, billiard playing, and spending beyond one's means.
I now have a beautiful red coat. I was so captivated by its splendor that I did not take note of its price. It would do justice to certain buttons which I've long been hankering after. Mother of pearl with a few white stones around the edge. Why is it, I wonder, that those who cannot afford it would like to spend a fortune on such articles, and those who can pay do not do so?
Renting rooms from the mother of Aloysia Weber, he hadn't far to travel for extracurricular entertainment. But it wasn't the recently married Aloysia who took his fancy, but her younger sister, Constanza.
Dearest father, you remember Aloysia? Well, the middle Weber daughter. Dear Constanza is the martyr of the family. She is the cleverest and, in short, she's not ugly. But not really beautiful. She has no great wit, but enough common sense that I love her, and she loves me with all her heart.
Signed, I suppose, your Apollo of a son.
Treachery! This is how I react to treachery! Betrayal! My own flesh and blood! How could he agree to such an arrangement? To marry this girl within 3 years or pay her money for the rest of his life?
Papa kept the archive, all Wolfel's former work, and would only release copies one at a time if he asked. It was right that he administer such control.
Oh, he must take me for an idiot. This Constanza Weber is clearly a prostitute and a guardian, a pimp, a panderer, a low peddler of dank flesh.
The Mozarts are unjust. It's true that my mother and guardian drew up such a document, but I was shocked to see such preconditions. I called Wolfgang to me and asked directly whether he loved me. He said yes, he did. And so I immediately ripped the document in two.
If I had my way, she would go down in history as the woman who corrupted my son, broke up my family. And my dearest Nunnerl, who stayed ever by my side, she shall have whatever riches I leave behind.
My brother wrote to me protesting as to how there can be such monsters in the shape of my father, and that he would write to him and call him worse than the devil, and that he would marry Constanza Weber with or without our papa's consent, which he did, and my father and I, no, we never forgave him.
Constanza played a central role in Mozart's life, both as lover and muse. Yet she's gone down in history, unfairly I think, as the woman who corrupted Mozart. This all dates back to his father Leopold's attitude towards her. He was bitterly opposed to their marriage, believing Constanza's family to be unworthy of his son. Meanwhile, her mother, a poor musician's widow, did everything she could to keep the lovers apart. As long as Leopold refused to give his blessing to the union, she banned Wolfgang from seeing her daughter.
Frau Weber, please let me in!
Don't you know? If you can't do the decent thing and marry her, then you're not going to see her. Leave my house.
I
Go.
only want to talk to her.
My concern, young man, is to protect my daughter's honor.
Daughter's honor.
Constanza, come away from that window.
Oh, Frau Weber, please!
Well, they got their way in the end. Despite my father's warning, he knew how unsuitable she was for him. It was good for my brother to be happy, of course. But he just had no idea how much pain this caused my father. And for this, I found it hard to forgive him.
Et benedictionem suam in vobis imperit. O Deus nomine Patris et Filis et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Neither Nan Earl, Mozart's sister, nor Leopold, his father, attended the wedding. But the following year, Mozart and Constanza made an attempt to heal the rift. Mozart wrote to his father promising to visit Salzburg and also inviting him and his sister to the premiere of his Great Mass in C minor, a work he'd written for Constanza.
My dearest father, about my moral commitment, yes, that's quite correct. I made the promise in my heart, and I hope to keep it. And as proof, I have the score of half a mass that is lying here waiting to be finished.
The promise was a pact Mozart had made with God. Before they married, Constanza had been very ill, and he vowed that if she recovered and married him, he'd write a mass in thanks. And the sublime composition he produced is one of the greatest religious works he ever wrote.
Mozart and Constanza had named their firstborn son Raymond Leopold in honor of the father who had rejected Constanza.
I found it hard to love my father and sister-in-law. God knows I wanted to. I longed to be accepted by his family, but there was no room in their hearts for me.
With reconciliation on Mozart's mind, and with some trepidation, the couple left the baby in the care of a foster parent and travelled to Salzburg.
My dearest sister, I hope you will not be offended by this step which I am taking solely from a sincere longing to communicate with a person who, though unknown to me, is yet very precious, as she bears the name of Mozart. I esteem you most highly as the sister of such an excellent brother, and I love you, and even venture to ask for your friendship. May I, in exchange, offer you mine? I trust you will accept it. And please tell your papa that I kiss his hand.
Perhaps Mozart hoped the Mass would act like a kind of peace offering for his family. He seemed to be saying, social status, money, these things may be important to you, but they don't matter to me. This is the woman I love. I love the fact that he wrote this solo part for her, rising phoenix-like out of that dark, pulsating opening. It starts in C minor, outwardly a very tragic key, but somehow here it's not sad. It has tremendous life force. It's as if he's saying, Constanza, in my world, is close to God. Mozart never completed the Mass, perhaps symbolizing the failure of the reconciliation between Constanza and his family. And while they were in Salzburg, they received tragic news. During their absence, baby Raymond Leopold had died. Over the next 5 years, Wolfgang and Constanza saw his father only once more. The rift never healed. But Mozart found in his new wife as much love, comfort, and musical inspiration as he needed.
I don't think the Mozart family ever believed that my sister was their equal. Certainly not musically speaking. But the truth is that in her love of music, he had met his match. She could sing.
That's it.
She could play the piano. She loved Bach and Handel. And surely he would never have loved her as he did if she hadn't shared his passion.
Now let me.
Mozart had studied fugue as a child, but it was Constanza's passion for the form that reignited his. The fugue form is actually an incredibly rigorous type of musical composition, which is all about imitation. What happens is you get the first voice coming in with the theme, or subject as it's called. Then at that point, the second voice comes in with the answer, which is actually exactly the same as the subject, but either pitched a fifth higher or a fourth lower. Then when that started, the first voice doesn't go silent, he continues, but now playing what's called the counter subject. Like a form of very high mathematics, but of course it's even more than that, because it's not enough just to obey the rules. You've got to make really convincing music at the same time. was this very layering of motifs that you get in fugue that was to add such excitement to his symphonic writing.
He was keen to impress on us that Constanza was behind this newly awakened love of fugue. Well, I seem to remember him delighting in this form when he was living with us. I wonder if she ever realized that despite my brother's brilliance, he really was a child. And remained a child, that was the problem. He always needed a father, a mother, someone to look after him. He had no idea about money, no idea how to manage his life and keep the chaos at bay. If only he could have found someone to look after him as I had done.
His father's consent was withheld until after the wedding. He was torn apart by it. And the feelings came out in other ways. I saw all the suffering, the pain, and the guilt.
By now, Mozart had experienced an intensity of emotions which he was able to draw from and pour into his piano works. I believe it's his experience of life that gave him the ability to capture in music the sense of what it is to be human. Music where joy and pain can be experienced at the same time with equal intensity. Here's a composer writing not just to fulfill a commission, but out of great spiritual inner need.
Dearest Wolfurl, Father refuses to release the music you have asked for. I'm sorry, but he is really very upset. You must think of him also, of all the years of sacrifice.
It's only on reading these letters that I realised just how painful the split was between Leopold and Wolfgang. They'd had the most intensive hand-in-glove type father-son relationship. The great irony is that following the break, Wolfgang became exactly the entrepreneur that his father had always been. He set about promoting himself in Vienna as the leading concert pianist, planning not one but 20 concerts which people could subscribe to.
And the word is that the music itself is shockingly passionate.
Give it here, I'll sign it.
Oh, no, I want to sign it.
I tell you, I am the senior here. I insist on signing it. Thank you very much indeed.
He is, I'm told, the most extraordinary player. The music is most complex and abstract in form.
Too many notes, the Emperor said. Quite enough to make your head spin.
What do you think? Doing everything himself. Not only writing and performing, but playing the businessman.
And these concerts are not in theatres. No, they're in the open air. And in casinos.
Mozart's new subscription concerts were an astounding success. They were the must-have tickets in town. Anyone who was anyone wanted to be there. He was also attracting a broader audience, the newly empowered middle classes. This was gripping music, which spoke directly to its public, a public that was already falling over itself to hear this great new athlete of an instrument, Mozart's redesigned forte piano, an instrument that was capable of taking the orchestra on equal terms in full-blooded dialogue and debate. And so by harnessing the great potency of this new instrument, coupled with his own creative brilliance, Mozart created the modern piano concerto. It's this enormous energy that pulses through Mozart's masterpiece, the D minor. He barely completed it before travelling through the streets of Vienna, followed by the instrument itself. Awaiting with anticipation was none other than Emperor Joseph II himself. But there was someone more important who planned to be there that evening.
Wolfgang and I had not seen one another for nearly 2 years, but I could resist it no longer. My son was hailed by all of Vienna. not only as a great pianist, but as one of the greatest, the most controversial composers of his time.
All Vienna has heard of the concert. You must be very proud. Perhaps I may glimpse the young maestro when we arrive.
No, he won't be meeting me. The truth is, he does not know what time I'm arriving. A little surprise.
As Leopold sat listening, the music he heard defied convention. There's a new confidence here, which you hear right from the start, this incredible, audacious and weird opening. Normally when a composer starts a piece of music, he lays out his stall with the big tune. But this is a non-tune, shows supreme command. The entry of the second theme comes as a real surprise. We've been here, then new key, and now he ratchets up the harmony, raising the blood pressure. Another remarkable thing about this concerto is the writing for the woodwind. They too have achieved emancipation, a sense of liberation. Listen here to this real dialogue between the oboe and the piano. There's a great childlike simplicity to this theme which opens the second movement of the D minor. It's of the nursery, but laced with nostalgia. It's like an adult looking back at their childhood, and that sense you have as a child of placing yourself completely in the arms and the love of your protector, your father. As ever with Mozart, there's a contrast. The floor falls away from the nursery and we're suddenly in a nightmare, a tantrum, a huge conflict between the orchestra and the soloist, between father and son, neither prepared to give way, a realization perhaps of just how far Wolfgang and Leopold's relationship had moved apart. Texture and colour saturates the third movement of the D minor. Mozart working at a white heat of compositional complexity. Here he is, decades ahead of his time. To me, this has all the torment, fire and passion of the greatest composer of the next generation, Beethoven. It's extraordinary just how much Mozart can make the piano and all his mature music echo our lives. He plumbs the depths of his own experiences, both great and tragic, and has to write music which expresses it. As such, I believe he is the first great musical romantic.
The concert was magnificent. I had the great pleasure of hearing so clearly all the interplay of the instruments that from sheer delight, tears came into my eyes. When he left the platform, the Emperor called out, "Bravo, Mozart." My son was hailed by all of Vienna, not only as a great pianist, but as one of the greatest and most controversial composers of his time. But I saw it first. I nurtured that talent in him. I had helped him become what he now was.
On a stormy evening in February 1785, the elite of Vienna gathered to hear a new work from Austria's leading virtuoso pianist, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. The importance of what lay within this masterpiece was known to only one man, Leopold Mozart, the composer's estranged father. I believe Mozart is the greatest composer of all time. The popular view was that he was born a genius straight from his mother's womb. But in my opinion, his brilliance grew and developed from the loves and losses during his brief 35 years. Life was the driving force of his genius. In this series, I want to discover, helped by the true accounts of those who knew him firsthand and following in his footsteps, how Mozart's own suffering and joy created music so powerful that it captivates the listener today just as it did that first audience more than 200 years ago.
By now, Mozart had fully outgrown his family. Nevertheless, his father had been his mentor and confidant for the best part of his life, so when Leopold died suddenly in May 1787, leaving most of his estate to Mozart's sister, Wolfgang was filled with grief and unresolved rage.
And what major work did he write next? A glorious confection, a fantastically fertile, daring romp of a piece. Eine kleine Nachtmusik.
I can produce better music out of my own arse.
What's he saying with it? Why is he writing such sprightly, positive music when such a significant event in his life has just occurred? Leopold, for so long the bedrock of his life, has gone. And you'd have thought it would have elicited from him some really deep, and dark and penetrating work. The reality is that when you get below the surface, this sheeny veneer, there is a dark brilliance to it. Here you have something which is outwardly bright and positive. It's in the key of C major after all, a lovely, wide, open key, perhaps echoing some sense of liberation from his father. And yet not far below the surface there's a much greater sense of tenderness, of poignancy. It's elegant, yes, but boy is it sad. Perhaps the saddest music ever written by anyone in a major key. When his father dies, the music it brings out of him is full of charm and warmth. It's almost as if he's trying to say, my dad's died, but I'm okay. Of course, you look a little bit deeper in the music and you realize he's not okay at all. Mozart had every reason to feel despondent. By 1787, his income was down to a third of what it had been during his most prosperous years in Vienna. A recession had drastically curtailed the capital's musical life.
For years, Mozart had tried to obtain a permanent position at the court of the Emperor Joseph II. His efforts had been in vain until December 1787.
When the composer Gluck, who'd occupied the post for nearly 3 decades, suddenly died, Mozart was at last appointed court composer.
So, have you found out how much the Emperor's willing to pay you?
It's a decent salary.
Well, come on, how much?
800.
And how much was Gluck paid?
2,000.
How can they say you're worth less? How dare they?
Assured me I were not to be forgotten in the future.
The future? What good can the future do us? We need money now.
Mozart told me this new job of his is driving him crazy. He hasn't been commissioned to do anything decent yet. He gets to do a lot of this sort of thing. I mean, nothing wrong with that, of course. But
And so the black thoughts, as he called them, continued. Yet somehow he'd managed to shake it off, put a brave face on it. You'd go round to see him, and he'd be prattling on about some new piece he'd written, some new jacket he wanted to buy, some famous billiards player just arrived in town. And all the while creating this sublime music.
This symphony, his 39th, was also written during that terrible but insanely creative summer of 1788. It's got a kind of savage brutality unlike anything we've ever seen in Mozart before. The very opening adagio has got this really almost ugly, pugnacious quality to it, with a huge motor driving it. And these downward and upward turning scales in the violins. Stark timpani writing, the drum writing. It's just driving us to the next jarring forte.
No one can doubt his genius, but he was always infirmant. His ideas were too frequently in a state of flux.
Just look at the symphonies. For all their pomp and fire and brilliance, they lack that sense of unity, that clarity and directness of presentation.
Which we rightly admire in the works of, for example, Mr. Haydn.
Noble simplicity, what's wrong with that?
Yes, Herr Mozart has a decided leaning towards the difficult and unusual.
perhaps one might say his music was too highly seasoned.
And whose palate can endure that for long?
Well, the critics missed the point. The opening may be difficult and unusual, but here's this charming allegro section which follows it, which wouldn't have half the potency it does had it not been preceded by that jarring opening material. Such a key for Mozart, this, that you put two characters side by side, and it's all about the particular oil they give off when they're applied to each other. There's something I love so much about Mozart. He's so human. He totally understood that you can't have joy without pain, terror without consolation, love without grief. And here in the 39th Symphony, he shows it. In defiance of critical opinion, Mozart continued to find new ways to innovate. In the second half of the 1780s, his writing for small groups of peers and friends was reaching its height. The composer Joseph Haydn was one of really only a very small handful of musicians who recognised Mozart's genius. And Haydn was probably just about the only contemporary composer Mozart felt he could truly admire.
To my dear friend Haydn, a father, having decided to send his children out into the wide world, felt that he should entrust them to the protection and guidance of a famous man who, by good fortune, was also his best friend. Well, here they are, distinguished man and dearest friend, my 6 children. May it please you to welcome them kindly, and to be for them a father, guide, and friend.
A true child of the Enlightenment, Mozart believed that we're all born equal. And in his quartets, as well as his late symphonies, there's a sense that every instrument has its own clear voice, in music of high sophistication. At a time when commissions were hard to come by, when Mozart was largely uninspired by the kind of music he was paid to write, these were works for his peers, for people he loved and respected, and who returned the compliment.
We never had enough money that summer. Despite the fact that my husband was working all the time. If not composing for himself, then teaching others. Usually extremely pretty, rich, young, aristocratic ladies.
And once again?
Who doubtless didn't have to worry where the rent money was coming from. Just whether they could get their arpeggios right.
That's it. What's your pitch?
Someone said, after he died, that he only ever gave lessons to women he was in love with.
Remember to breathe.
They hated me that much to want to continue wounding me even after he'd gone.
Mozart's financial affairs were reaching crisis point. Throughout his life, when things got difficult, his instinct had always been to take to the road. Now he set off on a whistle-stop tour, leaving behind Constanza and their only child, Carl Thomas.
Look after your mother for me. Yes? I'll bring back lots of money.
His plan was to play at the great courts of Central Europe, desperately hoping for the commissions he so badly needed to keep afloat.
He was a very proud man. He wasn't just going to sit around and wait for the work to come in. And if the Viennese couldn't appreciate him, he just felt he had to find his patronage elsewhere. I don't think he really enjoyed it. But if we were to survive in Vienna, he had no choice.
My darling wife, I beg you not to be sad. Take good care of your health, and be careful when you go out into those spring breezes.
Remember that every night before going to bed, I talk to your portrait for a good half hour. I kiss you and squeeze you 10,000,009,050,000 times. I am forever yours.
The trip was not a financial success. There was much applause for Mozart's work, but little in the way of profit.
The fact that Mozart didn't get the recognition he deserved is nothing short of a scandal. These incomparable works. Nations should have been vying to possess such a jewel. Without reward, the story of great genius is a sad one and offers little encouragement for further effort. And for this reason, so many hopeful spirits suffer defeat. It made me angry to think that this unique Mozart had not yet found an appointment worthy of his talents. Forgive me, I loved the man too much.
After 2 months, Mozart returned home with only a fraction of the hoped-for commissions in his pocket.
I think it was hard for my poor sister. When he was away, he always declared his undying love for her. Yet she felt that he was having a final time away from the family. And then he would chide her for being jealous.
You really should get some of your winter coats altered. Do you want to take them or shall I? Wolfgang?
What? Oh, sorry. Yes,
And Puckberg wants to know if he can come to some of your rehearsals. Wolfgang, you're really not listening to me at all, are you?
Oh, he loved his family. There's no doubt about that. But with music, when he was composing, or playing, or just thinking about it, It was almost as if he had withdrawn into some private world.
However, in a typical policy U-turn, Joseph decides to throw his weight behind the Italian opera.
German musical entertainments are all very well. But if you want the aristocracy to take notice, you need to address them in Italian.
Chameleon-like, Mozart sets about redesigning himself as a composer of Italian opera. Problem is, the texts he's had up until now have been poor, more or less off-the-peg jobs. And what he desperately needs now is a collaborator whose talents come close to matching his own. Enter Lorenzo da Ponte, who, when he wrote his memoirs at the age of 80, vividly recalled the time when, 50 years earlier, as court pert to Joseph II, he had first encountered Mozart.
I told him, in my opinion, to prepare an opera, it is necessary to know more than how to write verse. One must write so that the accents of the poetry respond to the music. He laughed and said he knew my poet's tricks, and in opera, poetry had to be an obedient daughter of the music.
Your words must be written solely for the music, and not shoved in hither and thither to suit some miserable rhyme, which, by God, contributes absolutely nothing to a theatrical representation, whatever it may be. And few can do this well, Lorenzo.
Wolfgang, one needs a musical ear and long experience. And then I said, if the words of a poet are nothing but a vehicle for the notes or the cue for action, why do you not then just use the words from a doctor's prescription, a furniture catalogue, or even a spelling book?
Verses are indispensable for music, but rhymes for the sake of rhyming harmful. Words, couplets, verses that can ruin a composer's whole idea.
I believe that poetry is the door to music. Inside all may be handsome, but nobody can see these internal beauties if the door is locked.
Then, if you agree to alter and even omit according to my wishes, I think we'll be able to work together.
So it was, we talked over a myriad of options. Then one day, he asked me if I could easily reduce to an opera this French comedy called The Marriage of Figaro, which had been causing quite a bit of a stir in Paris. The proposition pleased me well enough. But there was one very great difficulty to overcome. A short time before, the Emperor had, on the grounds that it was too outspoken for a genteel audience, forbidden this comedy's performance.
It is the will of His Majesty that the police censor reject this play entirely.
Signor Contino, il chitarrino le suonerò, il chitarrino le suonerò, sì, le suonerò, sì, le suonerò.
What was it about Beaumarchais' Marriage of Figaro that made it such a dangerous commodity? The play had become a European scandal with its overt criticism of the landed gentry and its Republican leanings. It even has that speech where Figaro says to his master, "What have you done to deserve such advantages? You took the trouble to be born and nothing more." Da Ponte cuts the more direct revolutionary statements and substitutes social comedy for social satire. If the opera had been in German, it could have been perceived as agitating social change, but because it was in Italian, the language of the aristocracy, it spoke directly to that class as a moral critique.
Saprò, 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 ma piano, 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 piano.
I am of the belief that all men are created equal at birth. From our parents we receive only life itself, and in this there is not the slightest difference between king, count, merchant and peasant. Where the aristocracy abuse this natural law, I will first hold up a mirror. then I will come down upon them like a wolf.
Lampi schermendo, latte adoprando, dico pungendo, dilla scherzando, tutte le macchine rovescerò, rovescerò. Lampi schermendo, latte adoprando, dico pungendo, dilla scherzando, tutte le macchine rovescerò.
The interesting thing about Se vuol ballare is that the words weren't in the original play. Da Ponte penned them. But what makes it really exciting is what Mozart does. He brings us much closer to the subversive zeal of the original by couching these rather revolutionary words with an aristocratic minuet. So Figaro's having this imaginary conversation with his master when he's saying, I'm going to be in charge, not you. And the music surrounding it is of utter nobility.
Signor Contino, il chitarrino le suonerò. Il chitarrino le suonerò, sì, le suonerò, sì, le suonerò.
The Emperor allows that your Figaro should criticize his master.
If that master should act as this Count does, seeking to seduce and corrupt another's betrothed. Well, His Excellency knows many in his own court who are looser than our Count. This piece will speak to them in a language they understand.
And the poor Countess, oh, how she knows she's lost the love of her husband.
She's not a helpless woman. Like you, she is strong and resourceful. Read on there.
Porgy Amor has these incredible long lines of intense suffering. But, as the music shows you, this is not, repeat not, a woman lying down to take it. There's heroism here, and cunning as well. After all, you have to understand and believe that the Count chose her. The music has these great sort of swirls of harmony. It's in F major, which is a lovely open key, and it's deep and rich and burnished, like a good Bordeaux.
She will join forces with the servant Figaro and his beloved Susanna, and together they will trap the Count.
And there is no doubt of Susanna's love for Figaro.
I'll let the music answer that question. Here.
Alto, alto, signor Conte! Mille occhi sotto fronte!
In The Marriage of Figaro, Mozart's genius for ensemble writing reaches its zenith with complex conversations that crisscross but never clash. The great thing that opera affords to any composer is the opportunity to articulate several different points of view simultaneously. And of course, in the hands of someone like Mozart, it's elevated into a completely different stratosphere. He had this amazing ability to inhabit a form with complete artistic freedom, and then to look on it from the outside, in a sense to be looking at the whole of humanity, with huge wisdom.
Senti questa!
Our world is so full of hurt for women. Tell me you will never turn a cold shoulder to me, Wolfgang.
Oh, my dear little wife, who is quite plump, but only round the middle. I kiss your hands 1,000 times.
We did not marry to live a life of vexation and quarrel, but to live in peace and happiness.
At that opera's first performance in Vienna, some of the singers made deliberate mistakes out of hatred and envy. Their intention was to bring about the opera's downfall. I tell you, when this piece was performed in my hometown, Prague, Mozart's art triumphed completely.
Will you dance with me? Well, another time then!
How accurately the subtlety of your melodies expresses the meaning of the poet's words.
It took me a while to trust De Ponte, you know. These Italian gentlemen can be very civil to your face, but behind their smiles.
Given the unpleasant professional rivalry and relative lack of success in Vienna, Figaro only ran for 9 performances, why didn't he simply move on to somewhere like Prague, where he was more appreciated? I think it's possibly because he was determined to succeed on his own terms. He'd adopted Vienna as his home and so had to prove himself to the city. Anything less was true failure.
May I address you as a friend? Here, we appreciate the true value of your works. Come and live in Prague.
True. I met with all possible courtesies and honour here. And Prague's indeed a very beautiful city. But I'm homesick, and long to be back in Vienna and the arms of my dear Constanza.
Here in Prague, people talk of nothing but Figaro. No opera draws audiences but Figaro. Nothing can be played, sung, or whistled except Figaro. Young people fly about in sheer delight to Figaro arranged for dancing. Nothing. Nothing but Figaro.
The success of our piece was as complete as we could desire. Theatre managers would cry, "Long live Mozart, long live De Ponte. As long as they exist, we shall never starve."
If we really think about it, death is the true and ultimate purpose of our life. I have, over the last several years, formed such a knowing relationship with this true and best friend of humankind that his image holds nothing terrifying for me anymore. Instead, it holds much that is soothing and consoling.
In the summer of 1788, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was 32, and he was at the height of his creative powers. And yet his life had already been marked by tragedy. The death of his father Leopold the previous year was now followed by that of his 6-month-old baby daughter, Teresa, the third child that he and his wife Constanza had lost to premature death.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
I've always been captivated by the fact that Mozart's life, full of passions and struggles, fueled his music. Now, the textbooks would suggest that Mozart, like his contemporaries, had classical attitude. In other words, that he wrote music for particular occasions, music of great worth, written with great ease, but nonetheless not born out of a need to express himself emotionally or spiritually. You see, for me, Mozart's music, far from being a function of life,
is a reflection of it. Mozart was getting to grips with the fundamental truths of the human condition, life and death. With only 3 more years to live, he was to revolutionise instrumental and orchestral writing, crystallised in his last great trilogy of symphonies, which changed the future course of music. In the weeks following baby Therese's death, Mozart sat down and wrote this, his 40th symphony in G minor, a work of fury, anguish and despair. It's Mozart at his most distressed. This first movement is flighty, unsettling, weird, almost on the edge of chaos. And yet, of course, as ever, Mozart shows us he's in complete control. It's a monumental piece of work in which he's able to encapsulate really the whole human experience. The symphonic form that Mozart had inherited was nothing like this. Symphonies were modest, small-scale affairs, kind of warm-up numbers in a concert in between more interesting items. They could deal with 1 or 2 little episodes of life, a couple of primary colours. But with Mozart and the full spectrum, he could genuinely express the world. Even at this most turbulent time in Mozart's life, he's saying, look what I can do.
Well, that summer was probably the worst of our lives. I was finding it difficult to cope. Pregnant all the time, it seemed. We were both ill. And then there was the money problem.
Even for such a talent as Mozart was, there's no guaranteed income. Even so, quite where all the money went, I think that was a mystery to all of us.
I mean, I know we had to keep up appearances, but it just seemed to slip through our fingers.
They were broke, no question about it. Fortunately, I was in a position to be able to help. But the begging letters used to break my heart.
I have to admit that it's just not possible for me right now to pay back the money you lent me. Instead, I must beg you to be patient a little longer. My finances are in complete disarray, and I will have to borrow more money no matter what.
I've asked him for 500 this time.
Are you sure that's not too much?
I know it's a lot, but if he can lend me even half that.
And that's how it was. Hand to mouth. Pugberg, God bless him, he did pay up. As he almost always did. But we never knew where Wolfgang's next job was coming from. Never knew whether he was in or out with the Viennese. Never knew whether he'd be repaid the money he himself lent to friends. The one thing I could be sure of was that he loved me.
In purely instrumental terms, Mozart made his final statement in his last symphony, his Jupiter in blazing C major. It was written during that stunning surge of creativity in 1788, the year his baby daughter died. This last movement is a monumental work, and it begins with what sounds for all the world like a fugue subject. But as it continues, you realise that this layering of motifs, this fugal style, is just one of many different concepts that Mozart has completely mastered and moved beyond. He's working at so much deeper a level of complexity in terms of instrumental colour and orchestral texture. And even though this symphony is his last, it's not an end point. For Mozart, there are no dead ends. It's as if he's bursting the door wide open on a whole new world of possibility. Mozart's no longer writing in the way that his predecessors had done, out of a sense of practical obligation and necessity, but rather out of a deep sense of spiritual need. For that reason, I believe Mozart is the first great romantic composer. Much more than just a fulcrum between the 18th and 19th centuries, I think these last three symphonies take us beyond what even Beethoven achieved. The Jupiter could be seen as the culmination of everything he ever wrote. This was a black period for the family. With severe leg pains, the heavily pregnant Constanza was sent for treatment at a nearby spa.
I've been living in such misery that I was not only unable to go out, but couldn't even write, out of sheer distress. There is some concern that Constanza's bone might become infected, but she's astonishingly resigned to her fate.
He often said to me that he was concerned about Constanza. And it's true, she suffered appallingly with her health. He used to send her off to this expensive spa and couldn't afford the bills. But he was the one that worried me, always catching a chill of some sort, and always too busy to properly recover. He really wasn't as strong as he looked.
Fate is against me, but only in Vienna. I cannot earn any money even when I want to. If it's possible for you, dearest friend, pay us a visit. And, if you can, help me.
Our little baby was taken from us within an hour of her birth. At least I was able to hold our beloved Anna Maria in my arms before they took her away.
As so often in Mozart's life, music became the healing response to sadness. A month after his baby's death, Mozart poured his desolation into writing works for wind instruments and premiered his clarinet quintet. A work written for one of his closest friends, the virtuoso clarinetist Anton Stadler. Up until now, the clarinet hadn't had a melodic role in chamber music. It certainly didn't have the same status as other wind instruments like oboes, horns, or flutes.
What fascinated him was that this was a little-used, fledgling instrument invented less than 100 years earlier, but which was developing incredibly fast and presenting a whole new world of possibility.
I had told his good father 5 years earlier that his beloved son was simply the greatest composer I had known, and my words were proved true. I so hoped that he would accompany me to London, where an impresario had hired me, requesting also that Mozart come too.
Please try and write whenever you can.
Well, of course I will.
Let me know how those English are treating you.
Perhaps you will follow me to London soon.
I fear this is the last time that we'll see each other. Farewell.
I told him enough of these dark thoughts, but he never reached London. And I never did see him again.
By this time, Mozart was suffering an anguishing decline in popularity. The death of Emperor Joseph II in 1790 deprived him of one of his most reliable patrons, making his prospects shakier still. But when Mozart, unlike most of his musical colleagues, wasn't invited to the new sovereign's coronation in Frankfurt, he determined to make his own way there.
Mozart pawned the family's silver and Constanza's jewellery to pay for the trip. Once again, hoping it would result in new commissions and more money.
He was happy to be away again, performing his music, meeting his friends. At the same time, there was a new note of bitterness in his letters that worried me.
If people could see into my heart, I should almost feel ashamed. To me, everything is cold, cold as ice. Perhaps if you were here with me, I might take more pleasure in the kindness of those I meet here. But as it is, everything seems so empty.
To the outside world, Mozart's fortunes seemed to be improving.
More wine, yes, more wine.
He was commissioned to write the opera La Clemenza di Tito, and the Magic Flute would soon be premiered to great acclaim. His work was finding new audiences across Europe, and as a result, his financial worries were easing. But privately, he knew that his health, weak since he was a child, was failing him. He was apart from Constanza once again. She was pregnant and also ill. And the old struggle between his art and family life still haunted him.
Actually, I think I'm going to put 3.
You cannot imagine how I have been aching for you all this long while. It's a kind of emptiness which hurts me dreadfully. a kind of longing which is never satisfied. Love me as I love you. Forever, your Mozart.
Coffee, Master.
No time, Primus?
Master! Thank you, Primus.
The Magic Flute is one of the most extraordinary works Mozart ever wrote. In fact, it's one of the most extraordinary operas ever written. It represents the culmination of all Mozart's social and political beliefs, eloquently expressed through his music.
2 minutes, Mr. Chickinator.
The path that started with the Domeneo developed through Figaro and the other operas he wrote with Da Ponte and reaches its sublime height in the Magic Flute. And whereas his Italian operas had been written for the Italian opera house in the city centre, this one was written for the suburban theatre and a mainly middle-class audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Emmanuel Chickinator.
Everyone here, good. Actors and actresses of the Free House Theatre, we are to have the honor to perform for the first time a grand German opera in 2 acts. The Magic Flute, written by your humble servant, Emmanuel Chickinator, proprietor of said theatre, with music composed by Kapellmeister and Imperial Royal Chamber composer, Herr Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Who, out of respect for a gracious public, not to mention friendship for the writer of the play, will now lead us through our present rehearsals. Our own sweet nightingale of the high notes, at last. Our diva of the dazzling upper reaches of the human voice.
My apologies, Emmanuel, and respect to you, my dear brother-in-law. What of my part?
Josefa. Your part will fit you like a perfectly tailored set of clothes. Queen of Night. At the beginning, the audience will think you good and magnificent, but by the end, they will know you to be magnificently wicked.
And Anna here will play your daughter, Pamina. Ben, you are the hero, Tamino, who carries the Magic Flute itself. And for my own part, why, I'm Papageno, the simple bird catcher. My trade is catching birds, you know. I spread my net and in they go, and all men know me as a friend throughout the land from end to end.
Mozart and Chickinator worked fast to construct a German opera that would, on one level, delight its audience, but on a deeper plane would carry secrets and truths that might enlighten that audience.
Hey, you!
What, me?
Tell me, good fellow, who are you?
Who am I? Stupid question. I'm a man like you. Who might you be?
I am a prince.
A what?
When at the beginning of the opera, Prince Tamino loses his way whilst out hunting, his chance encounter with the peasant birdcatcher Papageno launches them both on an epic quest towards self-discovery.
Many thousands.
Hey, maybe I could drum up some business with me birds. I think that's very good, don't you?
It's coming, it's...
Entertainment with a serious message. That's the tasty broth. Some passion, some comedy, lovely ladies, charming young fellows singing like starlings, good tunes a cabbie can whistle, and the enlightened message that one man is as good as another man, regardless of birth.
Bezahlt
The orchestral musicians that Mozart normally wrote for were as highly skilled and disciplined as today's players, but Schikaneder's house band were not up to quite the same standard, so he kept his scoring simple. But as ever, he turned this into a strength with arrangements that are economical, yet supremely potent. In this aria, Tamino gradually falls in love with Pamina whilst gazing at her portrait, and the most understated of violin lines delicately, almost subliminally, anticipates, even leads his emotions.
Josepha.
Giesecke, tell me quickly, how is the theatre set for my Queen of the Night?
The theatre, madam, has been transformed into a chamber of the night strewn with stars. We have built and painted an ingenious backcloth in which there are many holes. Cleverly, behind each one, I have arranged a lantern with a lens.
Never mind your oily rag talk. Is it a firmament fit for a star-blazing queen? Is it...
Mozart and I were lodge brothers, though he was this honoured genius and I was but Schikaneder's stage manager. One step up from the theatre cat. All enter the lodge as equals and progress from apprentice to master according to their merits or their own efforts. Who is knocking?
One who wishes to enter.
Enter, fellow of the craft.
Brother Giesecke, they tell me you have something for me from Schikaneder.
Yes, words for a scene with two armed men who instruct the hero.
He who treads this path of trials becomes pure through fire, water, air, and earth. Very good. If he can overcome the fear of death, he will ascend from earth to heaven. Truth, brother.
Mozart's time in Vienna coincided with the brief flourishing of Freemasonry in Austria. The lodge was a forum for enlightened views and new ideas, and Mozart embraced their philosophy wholeheartedly. But in the nervous social upheaval taking place at the end of the 18th century, Freemasonry, with its symbols and secrets, began to be seen as a potential hotbed of revolutionary ideas. Mozart, politically astute as ever, perhaps wrote the Magic Flute to show Freemasons a new, more open way ahead, as well as bringing their ideals to a wider audience.
May I ask, how is the progress on our theatre's great opera?
With my dear wife away in her spa, I'm often so bored that to write an aria is a relief.
So it is true. The piece concerns the secrets of the craft.
The piece contains the wisdom of the craft. We must open the gates of beauty and wisdom for those who wish to cross the threshold. and with a theatre manager willing to produce German opera for a German audience. But enough. I've allowed my tongue free rein, which is so rarely possible these days. You get drunk after every such outpouring of the heart and never do any damage to your health.
And this is Herr Schickenader's opinion?
Well, your employer may have no time for the lodge, but he well knows the trials a man must pass through to prove himself worthy.
I became a Freemason, not out of curiosity or selfishness, but through a sincere regard for their exalted company. From their sanctuary, despite the secrecy, radiate glimmers of nobility, humanity, wisdom, teachings which can enlighten and enrich a man.
Josepha Hoffer, the original Queen of Night, was Mozart's sister-in-law. He knew her voice and its particular qualities and knew exactly how to exploit them.
Josepha.
How hard, how fast, and how high he could push her.
Try and convince me. Convince me I can be a hero. Look at me, look at me. To me. That's it. To me, look. To me. Get off the stage, please.
With a voice like mine, any theatre in Vienna would have begged to have me. And I could have earned 3, 6, 9 times what Schickenader paid me. And let me tell you, not all parts were as good as this.
For my own part, I write to amuse the public. I've no wish to appear more learned than I am. I'm an actor and director, just as Mozart is a composer and musician. And above all else, we work for success at the box office.
Der Vogelfänger bin ich, ja, stets lustig, heißer Hocksatzer. Ich Vogelfänger bin bekannt, weil alt und jung im
Viel besser.
Weiß mit den Logen umzugehen und mich auf Zweifeln zu verstehen. Drum kann ich froh und lustig sein, denn alle Vögel sind ja mein. Wenn alle Mädchen wären mein, so tauschte ich grad Zucker ein. Die welche mir am liebsten wär, der gäb ich gleich den Zucker her. Küsste sie mich zärtlich, dann wird sie mein Weib und ich ihr Mann. Sie schlief an meiner Seite ein, ich wiegte wie ein Kind sie ein.
The enormous excitement surrounding the first performances of the Magic Flute must have felt incredible to Mozart. Everything had come together, everything he wanted and needed to express, and to an audience that he both passionately believed in and wanted to engage. And perhaps it's all best summed up by Ach ich fühl's, an aria which holds a mirror up in front of us all, the personification of desire, love, and loss.
Archigefühls is the most tremendous outpouring of emotion, of love really, and at the end of the day, love is right at the centre of everything Mozart wrote, certainly in opera. Opera is the greatest performing art form in my view because it's the best possible combination of all the performing arts, and therefore in the hands of a genius like Mozart, it has a transcendent power to change not only the characters within the drama, but also the audience.
Dearest, best little wife, I've just come from the opera. As usual, a full house. Your sister was seething and magnificent. And dear Schickenader got his encore for man and wife. But what pleases me most is the silent applause. The reputation of our opera grows. Some only see it, but others really hear it. If only you were here in Vienna. A mutual friend of ours, you know who I mean, had a box tonight. He laughed at everything. I nearly called him an utter ass. At first I was patient. I drew his attention to this truth or that wisdom, but his behaviour was so boorish it became too much for me. You papageno, I cried. I fear he didn't even understand my insult. Primus just entered with fried pork cutlets. Que gusto, little dove, my pretty. I eat to your health in your spa.
What time is it? 11, sir.
Perhaps you're already asleep in your little spa. I don't want to wake you. I kiss you 1,000,000 times and am, as ever, your Mozart.
The first great phase of Mozart's brief life was that of the travelling child prodigy, a ferociously gifted young performer and composer who grew into the genius that, working within the restrictions of his day, began to rewrite the musical rules. But there's another facet to Mozart, the adult thinker, aware of the bigger picture, passionately attached to the progressive values of the Enlightenment, a composer at the height of his formidable powers, determined to succeed in the most difficult and lucrative area of all, opera.
Tamino, have I offended you? Do you not love me anymore? Papageno, at least tell me what is the matter with my friend. Oh, this is worse than death.
The Magic Flute, written at the end of his short life, stands as the ultimate expression of Mozart's ambition to communicate the complexity of human life and the depth of human emotion through music and theatre. Constanza recovered and in summer 1791 gave birth to a healthy child, their second son, Franz.
Wolfgang told me we were going to have a wonderful life. He said we'd never get into such dreadful straits again. For the first time in months, our future was not something which filled us both with dread. And yet something happened that July which unsettled us both. A messenger arrived at our house, claiming to have come on behalf of a patron who wished to remain anonymous. This patron wanted my husband to write a funeral mass to commemorate his young wife who had just died. Wolfgang accepted the commission. The stranger said he would return with a further payment in a few weeks' time. He wrote day and night. The kidney pains that had so often afflicted him had returned. And as usual, he believed the work could cure him.
Constanza, I don't think I'm going to last much longer.
Don't say that. You need to slow down. You haven't stopped. Let's put the manuscript away until you're feeling better.
No.
Well, surely the patron can wait.
No, this is going to be a great work. I know it. And both my friends and enemies will be studying it long after I'm dead.
Oh, the patron can wait, Wolfgang.
Mozart had only a few more weeks to live. As well as a kidney infection, he'd now contracted rheumatic fever. He never finished the Requiem. Yet, for me, Mozart's genius had found its most complete expression 3 years earlier.
My dear brother-in-law was now so ill, and my sister was beside herself. I went into the city every day to visit him, and that Saturday afternoon, he told me he was feeling much better and would be coming to visit our mother on her birthday. The following day, I decided to stay at home. After all, he seemed on the mend. It was dark and cold that December afternoon. Such a strange feeling came over me. I couldn't get Wolfgang out of my head. And I knew I must leave immediately.
Oh, thank God you've come.
Sophie. So glad you're here. Tonight, you must stay and see me die.
You're going to be all right. I promise you.
But you must stay. If you don't, we'll look after my dearest Constanza when I'm gone. I already have the taste of death on my tongue.
One of the last things he told us that night was how bitterly he regretted leaving us, his wife and children, without being properly provided for. Why now? He asked me. Why do I have to go now? When I'm no longer a slave to fashion, no longer chained by speculators, when I can compose freely and independently whatever my heart dictates. Yes, indeed. Why now?
Mozart died in the early hours of Monday the 5th of December 1791. He was 35. And the widespread acclaim that he taught throughout his life only came after his death. His works were more widely published, performed, and loved than he'd ever dreamt of during his lifetime. As for Constanza, she was overcome with grief. It was many years before she could bring herself to visit his burial place. In the years that followed Mozart's death, it was Constanza who ensured that her husband's name lived on, publishing his scores and organising a series of benefit concerts throughout Central Europe. For me, his unerring instinct for what it is to be human, coupled with his extreme virtuosity as a creative artist, these are the reasons why Mozart is music.